Maybe not. Okay. How many of you are youth members? If you're a youth member, can you raise your hands?
Oh, wow.
We have a lot of youth members on the call tonight. Great. All right. So that gives us a feel for who our audience is this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't advance our slide here. My goodness. John, how do I do this?
There should be 2 arrows at the bottom of your screen, Mary.
Got it. Okay.
Oh, there you go.
So tonight we're going to be doing 3 things. We hope that we will learn to set a safe and supportive tone in camp that curbs problem behavior. So we're going to spend some time talking about what can we do from the get-go to make sure that problem behavior doesn't happen. We're going to spend some time understanding youth and adult roles and how we work together as a team to create a positive camp climate, and also to understand what the protocol should be when something does happen, when there is misbehavior. So how do we handle situations of varying severity, and how do we handle that when campers misbehave or teen staff misbehave, or even if adults in our camp programs show inappropriate behavior. I want to credit a gentleman by the name of Michael Brandwine. I went to one of his workshops at the American Camp Association conference last February, and I borrowed some of his material from a workshop he called Fantastic from the First. And he's an outstanding trainer. If you have an opportunity to purchase some of his books, he really is sort of the camp training guru at the American Camp Association conference, and just a neat guy. Okay. So I think we all agree that it's a smart thing to begin relationships by really making our expectations clear. And the way that we typically do this with our campers is simply by going over the rules. And sometimes this is done in kind of a negative way. It usually is a lecture with no participation from the campers. And at best, the leader may ask the campers, well, who knows a rule, or what do we do when we're here at camp? What kind of rules do we want to follow? But mostly, it's about what we don't want them to be doing. And so I'd just like you guys to type in the chat box there, what do you think are some of the downsides to this approach of the way that we typically set up expectations with our campers? And I would say also frequently with our camp staff. So go ahead and just type in the little pod here if some of you have ideas about what are some of the downsides to this approach. Anyone typing there? There we go. Nicholas is typing. Okay, so Emily says they only know what not to do. Good point. When the kids see that we don't want them to do it, it gives them ideas of what maybe to do. For Nicholas to finish typing here. Okay, so we get the idea that that this really maybe isn't the best way to approach setting expectations with our campers. So I'm going to propose a better approach. And this is based on the idea that people take better care of things that they create or things that they own. So to allow campers the opportunity to really own what their camp environment and what their camp week is going to look like and what their behavior is going to look like will produce better results as far as them adhering to what we hope that they will do. And there are two things that I think make this a better approach. One is that we're going to begin with the positive and sort of cover the negative towards the end of our expectations. And the other thing is that we're going to use questions instead of statements to help kids to be able to really create the type of environment that they want to see at their camp during their week there. So in order to do this, I would propose that each living group is going to need to start with either a large piece of paper or maybe a large piece of cardboard or tag board. And on the front of it, I would propose that we write, this is how we want to feel and what we want our camp and group to be like. And underneath, create a place for all of them to be able to sign after we create the agreement of really what we want our camp to be like. On the back of that piece of cardboard or large piece of paper, I would suggest drawing a line down the center, and on one side write good choices, and on the other side write bad choices or poor choices. And the whole purpose behind this big piece of paper is to help to build a discussion really about what we want our week to be like when we're together. I think oftentimes we talk about creating group agreements. Some of you may even have the CIT book that we've put out here from California 4-H. But oftentimes I think it's done in sort of a cursory manner where we just kind of sit down with the kids and we don't really spend any good effort at helping them to really understand what the importance is of creating expectations for living together, because that's what we're doing for the week. We are sharing living space together, sleeping space together, eating space together. So it's quite an intimate setting, and I think it's really important to to set the tone with a good conversation. So the first step is to ask your staff or ask your campers how they want to feel while they're at camp, and what are the good things that they want to have happen while they're in the group. So the conversation might start like, we're in charge of what we want our group to feel like and how we want to treat each other while we're here at camp. So let's talk a little bit to each other for just a few minutes about what we expect and what we want to do to make it happen so that everyone feels comfortable and happy and we know that we're all going to have a great time. So some of the things that the team staff would want to do in their living group would be to ask them questions. What are some good things we want to feel when we are here at camp? What kind of people do we want to be? What words would we want to use to describe us and our group? So if you're the leader or the cabin leader trying to do this, you can use this as a way to prompt them to begin to think about, really how is it that we want to be. So let's take just a moment and have people type into the chat box if you were doing this with your campers, what kind of things do you think your campers might want to say? Or if I were to say, say this is our camp staff and we're making a set of agreements for our camp staff, I would ask, what are some good things that you want to feel while you're here on the staff together? What kind of people do we want our campers to see that we are? So take just a moment and so Ariel says fun, prepared. We want to feel welcome, respected. We want to feel safe. We want to be safe. Outgoing and excited about what's going to happen at camp. I want to smile a lot. That's great, Roger. I want to feel understood. So these are great suggestions. So you get the idea that this is what we want to pull from the kids. Is, what is it that we want from our camp experience? You can always add your own by asking, how about this? How about if I would like to feel cared for. I would like to know that my confidences are kept. Okay, I see other people have written in, I want to feel comfortable and enthusiastic. We want to be role models at camp. We want to lead by example. Okay, so these are all things that we can put in to those agreements. Now, I think it's also important to know that this next part might be difficult for the kids to do, because what we're going to ask them is, if this is how we want to be, then what are some of the good things for us to do to make sure that we all have the kind of group that we talked about? And again, you stimulate the discussion and the list by asking questions like, so what are some good things for us to do that will make sure that we have the kind of group we want? We said we wanted to have fun, or make friends, or learn stuff, or be nice to each other. What are good things to do? How do we want to act? And sometimes with kids, they may have a little bit of a difficulty with this because it's not so easy for them. They haven't done a lot of this. They frequently are told, as opposed to being asked, what kind of things would make camp fun for them. So just take a moment and see if you can't type in some examples here for either your camp staff, or if you were a camper, what kind of things do you think what kind of ways do you think they might answer this question? So El Dorado says, we want to be respectful of each other. And sometimes when you have a broad word like respect, you might want to be specific and say, well, what does that look like? What does it mean when we're respectful? Let's be, what are some specific things that would show respect for each other? Lots of people typing. If you're not having fun, don't make it fun for others. Don't let your attitude or move bring anyone else down. So I want to stop just for a moment and look at the one from Glenn County, because those are actually things that we don't want to do, not necessarily things that we do want to do. And that's why this can be really difficult for the kids. People can be very focused on the don'ts and not so much on the positives. So, so really what we're hoping that we'll be able to get them to focus on is what is it that we want them to do, not what we don't want them to do. So here we have more don'ts. Don't touch each other's stuff without asking. So that's what we don't want to do. What is it that we do want to do? So Roger says, be helpful. Listen to people in your group. You just might make a few more friends. So those are things we want to do. Be helpful or to listen. So I've got some other examples here of things that we might want to say or do. Give a compliment. Give encouragement. Ask for help. Ask, how can I help you? Talk one at a time. Try a new thing. Ask, do you want to join us? Ask, what do you want to do? Say, I'm sorry. Okay, so let's go back to that list. So do you kind of get the idea of what I mean by a positive? Can you see how the kids might have difficulty coming up with with this sort of language? So you might need to get them started as a group by putting a suggestion up there so that they can see what you're talking about. But these are the things that we want to do to build a really positive culture in our camp. We want to be helpful. We want to be polite. We want to be kind. We want to be considerate. And that's where we want to be able to start with our campers, is always with the positive, always with the positive. Okay, so now here's where we have an opportunity for kids to come up with some negative things that we don't want people to say or do. Okay, so these will go on the other side of that piece of paper, and I'm going to go ahead and let you give some examples of some negative things that maybe we don't want people to say or do. This is where some of those earlier ones come into play. Okay, so saying he or she is weird. Okay, so you know, not saying things that hurt other people. We don't want to say things that hurt other people. Leaving other campers out. Okay, shouting at others. As a counselor, picking favorites. Do not talk about others' dress. Or do any sort of negative peer pressure to people. We don't want to pressure our peers negatively. Okay. So you get the idea. The kids will not have a difficult time coming up with this list because they know about bullying and dress code and those sorts of things. So, but we want to leave this to the end. And the other thing about this list is when we're presented with a negative, we should ask, what should we do instead? So instead of shouting at others, for example, what should we do? And ask that back to the group. Asking follow-up questions is a really important part to helping your campers understand why perhaps this isn't a wise thing to do and how people feel when people's feelings are affected. And not just the feelings of the individual child that perhaps is being teased or has had something unkind said about them. It brings down the whole group. I mean, it really creates a negative atmosphere at camp. And that's not what we want to promote. You know, we want a place where people feel safe, where people are going to have a good time, and where everyone feels welcome and included. So, yeah, I see lots of good ideas here in the chat boxes. So, thanks for sharing. So, when all this is done, on one side of the piece of paper, we have you know, the environment that we want to build, what we really want our camp to be like. We want it to be safe. We want our cabin group to be fun and supportive. We want to be sure that we all feel listened to and that we feel cared for. And after all this is done, then we should take some time to, you know, and to praise the process and say, you know, you guys have had a lot of great ideas. We not only have we really contributed, everyone has contributed ideas to how we want to be together, but you've really listed a lot of good things that we should think about in terms of trying to create that, you know, that environment here at camp that we want to be a part of. So go ahead and, you know, compliment the group and, you know, allow everyone to, you know, to feel good about the work that they've done. And then at the end, on the front part down below, have everyone sign it. I've heard where people have put their handprints on it. You know, they can create it with decorations. They can roll it up into a tube and carry it on the first day of camp if they want. You know, you can make a copy of it and post it in your cabin, or maybe post that one in your cabin if you'd like, or a meeting place. If you're doing this with your staff, you know, hang it up so your whole staff can see that. And when you have your, you know, debrief in the evening at the end of your day, or the place where staff just kind of go to hang out if they get some time off, have that up there so it can be a reminder of, you know, of what we want our, really what we want our community to be like. Okay. Here, everyone has a biz card in their pocket printed with the code. Good, that's a good idea. Okay, so what happens then when we find that we have a breach of the code? And I think, you know, one of the things that is important to say when we do see a breach of the code is to recognize that we make mistakes, and that mistakes can be made better. You know, we can apologize, we can recognize that we've done something that isn't right, say we're sorry, and work on, you know, being better the next time, you know, the next time through. So that's important, because what we don't want to do is put down other people or help other people to feel badly. We want people to recognize that their behavior is out of line, but we also, you know, want to do it in a way where, you know, where they're not singled out in such a way that they're embarrassed if, you know, if that might be the case. So when something happens, with say that there's an individual in your cabin group that you're having difficulty with, you know, the first thing you would want to do is talk to the individual. You know, not in front of the whole group, but just say, you know, I think that, you know, that remark was a little bit of cutting, a little bit of a put down, don't you think so? And, you know, address it in that way and say, you know, what do you think we could do to help so-and-so feel better, and see, you know, if the child can't turn that behavior around by, you know, making an apology. But sometimes, if there may be more than one group member, or perhaps there's a problem that is resurfaces over time, and that's when you would want to call a group meeting together. And anyone in the group can call a meeting. And those of you who are team leaders, you have the ability to call a team, you know, a meeting with your campers. You have the ability to call a meeting with your team staff. Adults have the ability to call a meeting if they feel that that's important. And so when we call a meeting, what we do is we ask everyone to sit in a circle, and then the meeting is best handled not by doing talking, but by asking questions and allowing the campers and or the staff to do the talking to begin to realize what the issue might be. These kinds of questions. Would someone please say what the problem is? Let's look at our code. What did we agree about this at the beginning of our week? Under our code, how do we handle this? So how can we solve this problem? Who has an idea? So it brings the problem back to the group for them to acknowledge and for them to do some problem solving around. All right. And I want to say again that the key to successful meetings is for the leader to just ask the questions and let the campers do most of the talking. the code of conduct should also be used when there are good things that are happening too. So, say you see campers that are complimenting each other or being generous or sharing or whatever. It's important to acknowledge that when you see that kind of behavior that the kids are doing and saying, hey, this is, you're right on with, with what we want to be doing here with our group. Thanks for being such a star in our cabin today. Okay. Should we move on, Emily, or should we ask for questions? Thoughts?
I'm happy to pause for questions to see if anybody has anything so far.
Okay, are there any questions so far? Roger's typing. Can we vote people out like Survivor? Just kidding. Sometimes we wish we could, huh? That camp is great for those kids. So, all right. Well, I'm going to let Emily move us through the next part of the presentation, and we can still, if you have questions, and you can unmute your phone if you want to just ask questions over the phone. That's okay too. But we'll go ahead and let Emily move on with the second part of the presentation this evening.
Thanks, Marianne. So we've talked a lot about, setting up kids for success and setting up expectations that everybody agrees upon. And we've focused a lot on the campers and on our youth counselors. But we also want to talk about setting our adults up for success and our adult counselors up for success. So what is the role of adults at camp? Like pretty much everything we do with 4-H, the role of our adults is to create partnerships with youth. We really want strong youth-adult partnerships where everybody feels heard, everybody has a voice, and everybody kind of has an ownership in what's happening. And we do this because youth and adults have very different but very complementary strengths. So within camp, or what do you think some of the strengths that older youth bring? So what are the strengths that older youth bring to camp? Leadership, absolutely. Confidence. Energy, that's my favorite. Experience, ideas. Experience with 4-H, knowledge, absolutely. So our youth have tons of resources at their disposal and are really amazing. Support, very good. Relationships with younger campers, absolutely. They have a lot to offer. And so what do our adults bring to camp? What are strengths that adults have that our youth may not? They drive, yep. That's a big one. Comfort. They have money, so lots of resources that our youth may not have. Experience. Any others? Guidance, absolutely. So both groups have incredibly valuable skills that we need at camp. Energy, a connection with younger kids. Those are creativity is one of my favorite things that our youth bring. But the adults bring a little more experience, sometimes a little more wisdom. Just having had more life opportunity to learn how to make wise decisions. And we need to draw on the skill sets of both of these groups in order to make sure that camp runs successfully. Teenagers have this amazing boundless energy and enthusiasm, but they may not quite be equipped to run a safe and effective camp by themselves. And honestly, most parents would never let their campers go to a camp that was completely run by teenagers. So our youth-adult partnerships are what help that happen. And thank you for continuing to add in comments in the chat box. You guys are all absolutely right. So how do you create youth-adult partnerships? What can you do in order to facilitate these for camp? Expect both teens and adults to attend the planning meetings. So all too often we have just our teen staff come and help to plan and create our camp programming, but that leaves our adults kind of out of the loop. So we want to encourage both groups to attend as many of these as they can. They also get to know each other a little bit better, and everybody has a much clearer expectation of what's going to happen at camp, and should things go wrong, they have ideas of what needs to be done as a follow-up. You can also pair up adults and teens to plan and co-lead camp activities. So instead of leaving all of the activity to either a youth or to an adult, have them work on it together. Provide a mentor for your youth in order to give them the resources. We can train adults to recognize and respond to requests for help. So I want you to think for a moment about your youth counselors at camp. What are some signs that you might see that they may not verbally express, but you can tell that it's time for an adult to step in? What might you look for a youth counselor that's giving those signs? They're withdrawn. Hostility. When they ignore a situation, absolutely right. They may not know exactly how to handle it. Body language, frustration, absolutely right. These are all things to look for in your youth counselors. Especially, I like the ones that they may not exactly know how to handle a situation. That's a great time to step in. And if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know how to handle this situation as an adult, there's a good chance that your teenage counselor doesn't know how to either. So look for all of these signs so that your adults know when it's time to step in before your teenager gets completely burnt out and frustrated, and make sure that they have the support they need, because that's really what our adults are there for. Look out for counselor clusters. So all too often at camp, I always see a huddle of adult staff and a huddle of teenage staff and the campers running around free. And this doesn't build youth-adult partnerships at all. So we really want to make sure that everyone, our youth staff and our adult staff, are really reaching out to different age groups, to different groups of people, to make sure that everybody kind of gets to know each other and they can form those partnerships. And we want to make sure that adult counselors, as well as our youth counselors, really engage our campers. So they're actively involved in the day-to-day activities. Our adults aren't sitting off to the side expecting the youth to take care of all of the camper interactions, but you want everybody to really be engaging them. So striking up conversations, just getting to know the campers, because that will facilitate future teen counselors as well. And finally, instill a sense of purpose. So making sure that everybody involved knows what camp is for. So what would you all say is the purpose behind camp? Or some of the purposes? Learning and leadership, absolutely. To learn, friendship, meet new people, have fun, absolutely. All of these are really important, making leaders for tomorrow. They're really important skills that we're trying to instill, and the reason behind what we do. And when everybody is on board with these purposes, they're much more likely to take steps to accomplish them. So if everybody has a very clear idea of we're at camp to meet new people and to have fun and to build community, they're going to be much more likely to maybe step out of their comfort zone a little bit and start building those partnerships and striking up conversations and things like that. However, no matter how much you set up for success and how many positive expectations you try and build, things can still go wrong. So what do we do when that happens? I've kind of set up 3 different levels of misbehavior or failure to meet expectations, misconduct, I guess, because we want to respond to things differently depending on what the circumstance is. So the first one is failing to meet expectations. So when we have a camper who isn't conducting themselves the way we would like to see it, and they just fail to meet expectations. So this is probably just like them not meeting the code that they already agreed upon. Okay, just minor infractions, things that they do that are kind of irksome and they really shouldn't be doing. So how do we address those? It can be addressed by a youth or an adult counselor. These things, and mostly it serves as a reminder. So these are a lot of the things that Marianne already talked about. You know, just saying, hey, are we following the code? Are we being respectful? How do you think this makes the other person feel? Something like that. They're really just a kind of a reality check to help them come back to what they should be doing. But when these failures to meet expectations become chronic, or it's an actual rule violation, so it's something that is not simply in our code, but it's kind of a hard and fast rule that is set in place mostly for safety. What do we do when that happens? First, what do you think are some examples that might be a camper violating a rule or chronically failing to meet expectations? Swimming without a lifeguard present, absolutely. It's a huge safety issue, and we can't allow something like that to go unaddressed. What else can people think of? Pranks, because that can spill over into bullying and things like that, or damage of property. Out alone after lights out, disrespecting authorities. Leaving camp potentially could be in this one, or it could go into the next level as well, I think. Bullying, absolutely. So all of those would be kind of rule violations or chronic and unmet expectations. And when it comes to this point, you really need to pull that youth aside, that camper aside, and address them privately. Now that can be a youth counselor or an adult counselor or both. But you want to make sure that you remove them from the situation so that we don't provide unnecessary embarrassment. You know, just because they have made a bad choice doesn't mean that they need to be humiliated. So make sure that you're addressing these things privately, keeping in mind that we always have our 2D policy. So that might mean that 2 counselors or 2 adult staff sit down with the camper, but we don't want them to feel ganged up upon, and so that could mean that one sits down and one is within eyesight kind of in the next room. You know, however you choose to set that up, you just want to make sure that it's not in front of all the other campers. You want to make sure that you're asking questions, and this will allow not only you to understand the full situation, because there might be a part of a circumstance that you weren't able to see as a director or as a counselor, but it will also allow the camper to work through what happened and to begin to see where maybe they went wrong if they haven't seen that already. And then finally, you want to agree upon together potential consequences for if this happens again in the future. What do you think would be some appropriate consequences for this kind of infraction? Any ideas? Apologize, trash duty. Okay, a timeout of sorts, absolutely. So those are all great ideas, and you want to agree upon those with the camper so that they don't think that the next time they're being singled out or they're being picked on unfairly, you can set expectations and say, okay, this is the behavior we've seen, it's not appropriate, and if it happens again, this is what we're going to do. This is going to be the consequence. And so it sets up a little bit of a fairness for that camper. And those are all great ideas. Now, a serious infraction is kind of the next level. What might be considered a serious infraction? Leaving camp, I think so. If a kid wanders off without anybody knowing or without permission, that might be a serious infraction. Fighting, stealing, harming others, absolutely. If they've put others in an unsafe position, drugs, absolutely. Okay, those are all great examples of serious infractions that we really need to address in a more serious manner. So if it gets hazing, so if it gets to that point, again, you're going to have the camper addressed privately, but you're going to have the camp director potentially be involved. So you as a camp director, with or without camper or counselors who were involved in this as well. And again, you're doing this to avoid humiliation, but if it's a serious infraction, you as the director are going to have to be involved in order to determine what steps need to be taken. You're still asking questions to make sure that you have a full understanding of what's happening and enforcing consequences that would be appropriate. So this isn't a kind of you get more than one strike issue. What kind of consequences do you think would be appropriate for a serious infraction? Absolutely. Involving the parents is always a good step, and going home, depending on how big of an issue it is. Losing privileges, depending on where the infraction lies, might be an appropriate response. And so at this point, you're going to need to fill out paperwork and communicate as necessary. So at the end of this presentation, we have some links for paperwork. If it's an instance where someone was harmed, if someone was injured, if it was a fight, things like that, you'll need to, of course, communicate with parents, with 4-H staff, and potentially call parents to send a camper home. Ultimately could be removed from 4-H, absolutely, depending on the infraction. All right, so that's what happens with campers. What about if we have a youth counselor who's involved in some misconduct? What might we do, or what might be some examples of youth counselors failing to meet expectations? Shirking duties, absolutely. Yep, just not doing what they're supposed to be doing, kind of being lazy, being late often, yeah. Not being prepared for sessions or activities, absolutely. So these are relatively minor, and again, you can go back and use the code that you maybe established with your staff, and this can be addressed privately. Again, you don't want to do this in front of campers because you don't want to kind of demean a youth counselor or take away their authority, and you also don't want to kind of disrupt the perception of your counselor as a role model. You know, the campers really look up to them, and you don't want to kind of disillusion them publicly. So you want to meet with your counselor privately. And again, this is mostly serving as a reminder. Now, your other teams are a great resource. You know, if you have youth directors or you just have strong youth leaders, they will often use positive peer pressure to get a counselor who's off track back in the right direction. Because, you know, if you have an amazing group who's doing what they're supposed to do, they'll kind of use peer pressure to help guide anybody who's a little bit off track. So what about chronic expectations? So these things happen repeatedly or a rule violation. What might be the next step or examples of the next step for counselors, for youth counselors? Socializing with other counselors more often, yeah. Leaving them on their own too much, yeah. We want people to make sure they're supervised. We really need the campers to be supervised because when they're not, it lends to all sorts of other problems. Bullying campers, failing to uphold the code, exactly. So again, you're going to pull them aside privately, and this can be your teen directors or your adult directors. So this kind of goes up to the next level, and you're getting directors involved. And you really want the youth to have self-reflective behaviors, or be self-reflective about their behavior. So you're asking them what they think about their behavior. You know, how does your behavior affect other people? How do you think this looks to your campers? You know, what kind of message are you sending them as a role model? So really look to your teens to consider their behavior and how it affects others. They're more than capable at this age to look back and to kind of have a better perspective on what they might be doing and how they might be perceived. And then again, you're agreeing on potential consequences. Okay, so what might consequences be for counselors who aren't meeting expectations? Any ideas? This one gets kind of tricky. You know, for counselors, taking away privileges might mean taking away responsibilities. You know, if they can't be trusted to do what they're expected to do, then maybe they shouldn't be in counselor status, or maybe they need to have another counselor partnered with them. So it gets a little bit tricky as to agreeing what the consequences are. And if you're at a loss, that's okay. Ask the counselor. You know, if you're kind of disciplining a counselor or helping guide their behavior, ask them, what do you think we should do if this continues? You know, what should happen from here? How can we help? How can we work together to solve this? So turn it back on them, because they usually have a good idea of what would affect them in order to make a positive change. And then finally, serious infractions. What would be a serious infraction from a youth counselor? Yep, having harmful substances or endangering counselors, verbal or physical abuse towards a camper or towards another counselor or adult. Absolutely. You know, I think those are probably the big ones. The big ones, fighting and substance abuse. Those are pretty much no-goes. So again, you are alcohol, drugs, weapons. Yep. You're addressing them privately, and you as the camp director are addressing them privately with other adults. While we want to allow our youth directors and our youth counselors to really have a role in this discipline procedure, we can potentially put them in a very awkward situation by having them discipline a peer at this level. So we really want to handle this as adults. And we're going to ask questions again. Like always, figure out what actually happened and then enforce consequences accordingly. So what would consequences at this level be? Exactly, Marianne. Pretty much you're being sent home. If it gets to this level as a counselor, we're kind of sending a message that it's time to go. So again, you're filling out paperwork. If someone is injured, there's incident forms, and then there's other complaint forms that we'll see at the end, and communicating to the necessary parties. And our final misconduct is adult misconduct. Unfortunately, sometimes we have trouble with our volunteers, our chaperones, our adult staff. So failing to meet expectations, what does this look like for a volunteer, for an adult counselor or an adult staff? Treating camp like vacation, absolutely. Not engaged, not doing their share of the work, exactly. We really want to make sure that, like we talked about before, those youth-adult partnerships are being formed, and adults are mentors and role models. And if they're sitting off reading a book, they're not able to do that. And so that's part of setting them up for success at the beginning, making sure that they have partnerships and they know what their expectations are so that they're not tempted to do that. But if they do, and if that's what's happening, then fellow adults need to do this. We shouldn't put our teens in a position of having to discuss misconduct with adults. So we're really doing this as fellow adults. And again, we're serving as a reminder. If this is somebody who maybe came on last minute or who you weren't able to set expectations up for, you might just say, hey, we would really love it if you were more involved, or whatever the issue may be. Okay, if these behaviors continue, or if there's rule violation, we need to take it one step further. So what might examples of this be, this second level? Disrupting camp. Absolutely, overstepping their bounds or their duties. Okay, and this could be similar rules that kids would be tempted to break. If they go out on the water without a life jacket on, that's a rule for them as well. And so you need to make sure, gossiping or causing unnecessary conflicts, good one. So you need to address them privately as the adult director. So your adult director needs to pull them aside, and it doesn't really need to be everybody's business. You don't want to make this public. You don't want to add to any gossip that might be happening. You just really want to address it kind of quietly, but making sure that you understand their side and they understand their expectations. And at this point, you may want to get advice from your 4-H staff. So you might want to call them in and either ask for their advice or get their opinions. And at the very least, just communicate with them that something is happening, because we always want our 4-H staff to understand any issues that happen at camp. And then finally, a serious infraction. What might a serious infraction from an adult volunteer be? Encouraging campers or counselors to misbehave? Substance abuse. Leaving camp. Absolutely, leaving campers unattended. So, yeah, drugs, alcohol, things like this, those are serious infractions, and you need to address those issues. And you, as a camp director, have the authority to address these issues. Now, if you need the support and want the support, by all means, contact your 4-H staff, and certainly after the incident happens, make sure your staff are involved. Make sure the county office knows what happened and what's going on. And you can pull them in for their help and advice. If for some reason you can't get a hold of them or they're not available, you as the adult camp director have the authority to manage this in the best way you see fit. Okay, we don't want to leave somebody at camp, leave an adult at camp who may create a sense of unsafety or discontent at camp just because we can't get a hold of the 4-H office. So you as a camp director have the authority if you can't get in touch with the 4-H staff. And again, you're filling out the paperwork and communicating with people. So if it comes to this level, if you're sending people home, what are the steps that you need to follow in order to do this? First of all, make sure that you stay calm, okay? Make sure that you know that you do have the authority to handle the situation and the ability, okay? So you want to stay calm. Make sure that you are confident in yourself, because this is right up your alley. This is what you're able to do. And make sure that your anger isn't getting the best of you. Kind of an emotionally charged situation probably isn't going to help the situation. So take a few deep breaths, make sure that you're in control of the situation before moving forward. You want to remove any participant in question from the situation and ensure everybody's safety. So if there's a situation where there was a fight or that people were harmed or that people felt unsafe, you want to make sure that anyone involved in that situation, especially an instigator of that situation, is removed. And you want to make sure that everybody's taken care of. So before you start disciplining a potential misbehavior, you want to make sure that everybody is taken care of and there aren't campers or youth counselors who are left kind of feeling very flustered or emotionally drained or anything else in the corner. So discuss the incident with relevant parties. Like we said, we always want to ask questions to make sure we're getting the whole story. This does not have to be done with the parties together. Okay, if you just had two kids who got in a fight, you don't want to lock them in a room together to talk about what just happened if they're still really emotionally charged. You can do this separately. So, have two different directors or two different sets of adults talking to these, or talk to one and then talk to the other, but you may not want to put them back together in the same situation. But make sure you're getting everybody's perspective. You need to then decide if sending the participant home is the best or the only option. In some cases, you just can't foresee any other consequences being effective. And at that point, this is what you need to do. And again, you can call in 4-H staff if you would like backup or support provided. And this is where you call parents and other necessary parties. So if it's time to send somebody home, you need to call the parents of anybody involved in the incident. So if there's an instigator to the incident, you're calling their parents and having them, come and pick up your camper, your counselor, whoever. And if there was someone who was potentially a victim or who was also involved but maybe isn't to the level of being sent home, those parents need to be communicated with as well. And these are hard phone calls to make. Sometimes they really can make you uncomfortable, but in my experience, as long as you kind of are very understanding and willing to listen to the parents, they usually go pretty well. And then at this point, you would make sure that the 4-H staff, if they have not yet been involved, are involved. Fill out incident reports or formal complaints. So incident reports are really papers for if there was an injury or if there was a situation where someone was potentially harmed. Those are incident reports, and they're primarily for insurance purposes. And formal complaints are what you're going to fill out if the 4-H office needs to follow up or if you just need the 4-H office to be aware of a situation. Those formal complaints, we have a procedure that as 4-H staff, we push those complaints through to make sure that issues are addressed appropriately. So you may need to fill out one or both of those papers. And you want to make sure that you have access to those when you're at camp. So make sure that's in your checklist to include those or to have them downloadable or however is best for your camp. When you're sending somebody home, you're going to escort the participant to pack their belongings. And you don't want to leave the camper or counselor or adult alone at this point, partially because there's a good chance that safety was involved if it's gotten to the level of someone being sent home, and we don't want that feeling of unsafety, whether perceived or actual, to continue. So you're going to go with them as an adult, or have someone go with them, have some adult go with them to pack their belongings. And that makes sure that they stay safe and that everybody else stays safe as well. And finally, you're going to make sure that that participant, that the person in question is supervised and away from others. So again, you're not putting them back in a situation that could be emotionally charged, but you're making sure they're supervised. And it's really important at this point to not be mean. They already know that they've messed up when it's gotten to this point. They know that they have done something wrong. You don't need to berate them or to continue making them feel bad. Reassure them that everything's okay. One of my favorite sayings that Marianne has taught me is that FAIL, it stands for first attempt in learning. And just remember this as you're treating with somebody who maybe made a bad decision, but you don't have to continue to hit them over the head with whatever has happened. Just make sure that you kind of reassure them and that you still love them as a participant despite whatever action that's happened. And as promised, here are some resources that you all can utilize in case it comes to that. The American Camp Association, if you're unfamiliar with the ACA, they kind of set the standards in camping, in residential and day camping. They kind of are the go-to people for resources to find out best practices and things like that. And they actually have a hotline that is manned over the summer that you can call and talk to a seasoned camp professional to get advice. And they are trained to kind of handle situations that you may not have ever come in contact with. You may not be familiar with the circumstance that's happening at your camp, and you just want some backup advice, and ACA is a great place to get that. They also have some resources online, and then ANR has on our 4-H, California 4-H website, we have all of the reports and codes of conduct and things you may need. So you're welcome to kind of copy this if you can do that, and we're also, I believe, recording this webinar, so we'll have the link up on the website in the next couple of days so you can access these. Or if you just go on the California 4-H website and search any of these things, it should pop up. But I think that that is all I have, so we're welcome to open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions, comments, things you'd like to chat about?
I would just like to say one additional thing, and in fact, if I could get a show of hands, if you guys could click your little hand piece up here, how many of you actually have adults, your adult chaperones that are a part of your camp planning sessions that happen with your, as you're organizing your summer camp program? All right. Oh, we have 10 people who've raised their hands. So this is really, really good. I can't emphasize enough that, the best way to really avert any kind of problem at camp is making sure that you really have a camp staff that is all on the same page and really understands, the importance of working together, and that your teens and adults have mutual respect for each other, and that they feel like a single unit. And that happens when they're trained together and when they have an opportunity to work together before camp starts. Okay, so hands down. I'm going to put down the hands. Different question this time. How many of you have already have had an opportunity to talk about what kind of environment, really had an intentional conversation with your camp staff about what the environment at camp is going to look like? How many of you have done that and helped to allow them to have some ideas of what kind of things they do want to do and don't want to do to help to create that? Okay. Right, we've got 14 people who've raised their hands. That's great. So, again, it's that idea of, really setting that tone early on, and it's not too late to do that. To have that conversation with your camp staff, youth and adults, and pull out that big piece of cardboard and say, okay, let's really talk about and let's write down what is it, how is it that we envision our summer together, and what is it that our camp is going to look like. So I just wanted to encourage you to do that if you hadn't done that yet. And maybe if you have done it yet, pull it out at the end of your staff training, right before you're ready to launch up to your camp facility, to have people look at it and share and connect over those again. Okay, are there any questions? You can unmute your phones and feel free to ask or type them into the box. We have about 5 or 6 more minutes left on the webinar. I see a couple of people are typing. Can we share stories? Well, we have a few minutes, and if there's something that you'd like to share that's pertinent to the discussion. If there's no other questions, we could certainly share a story. Nicholas, you want to unmute your phone? No names. Well, thank you very. Looks like everybody. Thank you very much. We're really really glad to have done this with you today. Thank you for participating, and we hope that this has been helpful. Emily, any parting words?
No, thanks to everyone for attending. We really appreciate all of your feedback and your input, and it was great.
Okay, very good then. So have a great rest of the evening, and have a great summer. And if you have any further questions, this has been recorded, and you'll be able to go online to find this particular presentation. And of course, always feel free to give myself, John Borba, or Emily a phone call. We'll be happy to help you in any way that we can. So thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thank you all.